All right, we ready?
I'm good when you are.
All right. Welcome, everyone, and good morning, America. How are you? Uh, it is June 13th, beautiful day in Williamsport, the Mount Olympus of Little League. And I wanted to welcome you to Penn Patriots Radio Pushback. Um, my co hosts are Todd and Rob. So, Todd Bartley and Rob Noor. And we've started this show because we wanted to be able to give a, a setting where people could come and learn how to stand on their own 2 feet and defend the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and all thought that goes through that lens. And today I'd like to talk about the many things, but I'd like to start with, before I introduce my guests, with the fact that if you're not white, no matter what you do or say, doesn't matter. So you might as well do what you want, just like Black Lives Matter. Because if you don't support these monsters, you're racist. And if you do, you're using the movement for clout. So why should I, in good faith, accept that all cops in America is racist, spend time trying to convince race hustlers operating in bad faith to give up victimhood? Why? I would rather ask questions so people can for themselves do and think what's best for them, and hope that aligns with the vision that the founders had for the interests of Americans they represented. And with that, I'll introduce Robert Noor. Robert, 2 minutes on, is Republican silence violence against Republicans?
So this silence is violence trope, which is if you're not bending the knee to the official narrative about this country being systemically racist, you're engaged in violence. It's ridiculous. And the argument is the actual violence, looting and burning buildings down, is free speech, but silence is violence. So yeah, in that sense, no. But I get what you're saying. The leadership of the Republican Party is just as bad at this point as the leadership of the Democrats. The Democrats are encouraging racial division, which is destroying our country. The Republicans are too cowardly to say anything about it. I talk about this all the time. I get more upset at the Republicans because we elect them and they're supposed to be a voice for us in conservative principles and constitutional principles, and they do nothing. Nothing. They don't even have the nerve to stand up and say that this isn't an evil country. It's not systemically racist. They just cower in fear because they're afraid that the Democrats and the institutions that are controlled by them will call them racist if they stand up and discuss obvious truths. No one's saying that we shouldn't be concerned about the plight of inner city Americans and the terrible deaths and destruction that occur there all the time. No one's saying we shouldn't deal with police brutality. 99% of this country thought that the murder of George Floyd was unacceptable and wanted some form of accountability. But if we have to stand aside and allow this Marxist narrative to be pushed that somehow this country's evil and that capitalism's evil and the institutions of this country and the founding documents in our history needs to be torn down, then the people we're electing to represent us are failing us miserably. There is a lack of leadership from the Republican Party when it came to the lockdowns. There's a lack of leadership even worse now when it comes to the riots and the destruction of our country we see spreading across it.
Right. Mr. Todd Bartley, did politicians lie to us about the virus? I mean, how many of their ill-conceived blanket policies, instead of focusing on those at risk, by their actions, killed people in general, not just nursing homes? And then 2 minutes on that. And if you could please, after, introduce our guest.
You might be on mute, Todd.
You might be on mute, Todd.
Sorry, gentlemen, not to not answer your question for you, but with our guest being so prompt at 11:06 here this morning, allow me to defer my time to the honorable state representative who's been on the front line in those battles on a daily basis, from the Pennsylvania House. It's none other than State Representative Russ Diamond. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Hey, thanks for having me. I know I said I couldn't zoom in. I'm like kind of working on my house here today, but I figured, well, I'm still presentable enough to be on video. So,
welcome.
It appears you may be painting. That looks like a painting shirt, maybe.
Actually, that's just a T-shirt. What I'm doing, I'll pan over here. I'm putting that kind of stone on my house. So, yeah,
nice.
It can be dirty work. So.
I think the three of us may have projects for you in the near future.
Yeah.
If you have a couple of minutes.
If I get voted out by the coronavirus, I'll let you know, okay?
So to Carlos's question to me, Representative Diamond, it's one of these situations, and specifically with the nursing homes, and we saw the Secretary of Health's order that potentially sent patients that were COVID positive back into nursing homes. Can you speak to that and what your understanding is of that order?
Sure. That order was made on March 18th, I believe, or maybe it was March 19th. That was less than 2 weeks after we started this disaster emergency in Pennsylvania. And I was particularly offended by that because in Pennsylvania, we had like a week and a half, maybe a little bit more warning about what happened at the Life Care Center in Kirkland, Washington, where dozens of senior citizens and dozens of first responders got caught up and they got quarantined, they got sick. So we had fair warning of how this sort of thing spreads through long-term care centers. And look, it's no mystery that even non-novel viruses spread through nursing homes like wildfire, just because of the way they're set up, 4 people to a room, people going from room to room to room to attend to patients, that sort of thing. So it was particularly offensive to me that they made that decision on March 18th, less than 2 weeks into this. And you see the result. Nearly 70% of Pennsylvania's deaths are in long-term care facilities. In fact, here in Lebanon County, we've got a long-term care facility called Cedar Haven. It used to be owned by the county. The county sold it to a private firm a number of years ago. I had an aunt who was there for 30 years, and she was in there both when it was county owned and when it was privately owned. They gave great care, but apparently there was an employee who had a father at home, allegedly, who had COVID. That employee kept going to work, and now it's spreading. I think they have 3 different floors that have COVID at this nursing home here in Lebanon County. So it's that kind. This is like having a policy that insists that a COVID positive patient goes back to the nursing home before they're fully recovered and while they're still communicable. It's kind of like throwing a ticking time bomb in with these folks who live in there. And they're mostly, our greatest generation, the folks who sacrificed or fought during the greatest war of our time. I think this is borderline atrocity. It really is. And I only say borderline because I don't think anybody meant for that to happen, but that's what happened as a result of that policy and the other policy that went into effect. I think it was March 7th that just stopped inspections at our long-term care facilities in Pennsylvania.
Now, even though Rob Knorr here, thanks for joining us again. Even though it might not have been done intentionally, here's what upsets me the most about this. There was this sort of moral superiority from Tom Wolf and his regime about why we couldn't question the lockdown. We just had to accept it, or we wanted grandma to die. Yet their policies that directly led to these deaths seem to be completely inverse to the morality they were speaking. And then what really I find frustrating is they're using the deaths that they helped cause in these nursing homes to further justify locking down things like schools, where we could see that from ages 18 and under, that actually the common influenza is more deadly than the COVID virus, to shut down people going to work and things like that. So can you speak to kind of the hypocrisy and the just kind of outrage that you feel when you see they stood on their moral high horse saying that we didn't care about the elderly, when in fact they're using those deaths to excuse locking us down further?
Yeah, it's kind of like that old campaign tactic where people are running for office, or an incumbent is running for office, and then what they do is they create outrage by staging some sort of response to the challengers' actions, and then they get somebody else with authority to weigh in, at maybe the local DA, what you have it, and then they generate a press release out of that, which generates then a news story, and then they point to that news story as the evidence as to why the challenger should not be elected. Well, you created the whole scenario. I mean, it's kind of like this weird kind of dynamic that we have in politics, BA, and they're playing it out to the ultimate degree where it has cost people their lives. It is absolutely astounding, and how they continue to have a moral superiority about what they're doing as opposed to what people who oppose their actions do. Kind of like when, I mean, they trashed me for going out and participating in rallies in front of the Capitol and said it was dangerous. They said, effectively called me a coward for trying to open up our county. But then when the governor went out and marched along with protesters he agreed with, whether you believe in their ideals or not, but he believed in their ideals. Then when they asked them about that, well, these orders are just guidelines. I mean, they kind of soft pedal his violation of his own orders. But when somebody else is doing it, oh my gosh, it's because you want to kill grandma.
Representative Carlos Saldivia from Williamsport, Pennsylvania, thank you for joining us. And what I would have to say to your comment right there is that they just love redefining terms. That's their favorite game. He's a hero, but you're a coward. In that vein, I was raised with the idea that you might as well start with the truth because you're certainly going to end up with it. So the whole point of America is that we're all supposed to be created equal, and we're all supposed to be our own masters. Based on that idea, did they, in your mind, deliberately keep us uninformed about the virus? Or is it just that they simply misled us because they didn't know what they were doing? They were making it up as they went, and they were too embarrassed to ask for bipartisan help. I mean, when there is a crisis in your life, do you pick what side of the political spectrum you're on, or do you pick the people that solve the problem?
Look, let me be as fair as I can be about this. I believe that when we first started this disaster emergency in Pennsylvania, I think they just didn't know what they were up against. And I will give them the benefit of the doubt that at the very beginning, they tried to do what was right for Pennsylvania, whether we agreed with it or not. It very soon after that turned into, wait a minute, people are starting to realize that they don't know what they're doing, but they want to insist that, well, we are relying on experts and, scientists. However, at no one point did they ever name a single scientist, a single epidemiologist, or list their credentials like other governors did, or like the president might have, and say, here's who I'm relying on. They never did that. They just said, just trust us. We're taking you down the path. And then at some point, it became obvious that to most of the people in Pennsylvania, that they didn't know what they were doing and that they were making mistakes. And their hubris prevented them from actually going, look, we made a mistake here and we're going to dial this one back a little bit. Instead, they just walked things back and continued to walk things back, kept changing the goalposts, and not relying on the metrics they initially stated. And it just has become really a comedy, not of errors, but of terrors when you think about the actual result of how many people have died in these long-term care facilities as a result of those errors. So I think it started out benevolent. It got a little iffy. And now at this point, it's just malignant. It's just malignant the way they continue on down this road.
Before I kick it to Todd, did anybody from the governor's office, to your knowledge, reach out to the Republican Party or to you personally for help?
Not for help.
Wisdom or backup or anything, like you would on a team. I need your help. We have this problem. Can we gather? Can we huddle up? That's an American term, a football term.
The short
was
answer.
there any esprit de corps in gathering to go and fight this thing that struck the world, Representative? Not our state, not our country, the world.
There was nothing like that. All the communication from the governor's office was one way, with one tiny exception on my personal part. Early on, when he had the stay-at-home orders, I had a number of constituents who asked me how that impacted their custody orders for their children. And I foresaw that as a very, very potentially volatile situation, because when the police are called because somebody's not, returning their child when they're supposed to, that can turn very ugly. So I actually wrote a letter to the governor. I said, these are the concerns I have. Can you please make a clarification on your public website? And the next day they did. It was a very tiny thing that I was successful in. As far as the great picture, look, you can just look to the initial shutdown itself to tell you what the attitude was. They have 253 community experts working right down the hall from the governor's office. Not once did they come and did they ask us, how can we do this messaging? Your community, that sort of thing. Just like he ignored all the industry experts who are right down the street from his office on State Street in Harrisburg. Never brought any of them in to consult on how to do this properly either. So that has continued on through. I know that the administration has had conference calls with leadership in the House and the Senate on maybe a weekly basis. I'm not sure how often that has happened, but never once has our leadership come to us and said, hey, on the conference call today, the governor has asked for our help on X, Y, and Z, so we're going to be doing that. I would expect that our leadership would have done that, because I know our leadership has the best interests of Pennsylvanians and our constituents and us at heart. And if there was a way for us to get involved and be proactive rather than simply reactive to everything that the governor was doing, I guarantee you our leadership would have made us aware of that. That has never happened, not once, ever during this crisis.
Carlos, thank you. Representative Diamond, I want to ask you quite a difficult question. The governor has said in many of his public statements and several of the questions that I've posed to him over the last several months, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, right? That's one of his go-to lines. Does it bother you now that with everything that happened with SB 323 combined with HR 836 that was passed, that the general counsel appeared in a press conference last Wednesday on behalf of the governor, and now it's in the hands of the Senate and House attorneys at two levels? Commonwealth Court, it's in the hands of the lawyers and judges, and at the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Does it bother you at all that as an elected official, elected representative, that your power may well be usurped by the general counsel and then the lawyers and the House and the Senate?
It does bother me a lot but I will agree that there is some consternation over the trajectory of events as they should occur after this resolution was passed. And regardless of what side you fall on, you would want our courts to weigh in, because here's the situation. You have one branch of government telling you one thing, that's the governor. You have another branch of government, the 150 people in the General Assembly, who have decided something else, and they are polar opposite of each other. So, and there is some confusing language and some confusing case law about how this should be handled. I think before we do anything, that third branch of government does in fact need to be heard from. It's a shame to me that it's going to take another week to hear those arguments and to get the governor's position on this. But yes, to your question, it does bother me that for a very, very long time, when asked very simple questions, the governor has said, I'm not a lawyer. But now, when the proverbial brown stuff hits the fan, he's lawyered up. And he had threatened to take the General Assembly to court. the Senate was prepared for that and actually preempted his filing in court by filing themselves. I think it's better for us to put him on the defense rather than to have him on the offense. But regardless of who filed first, the same questions will probably be answered regardless of who filed first. So it does disturb me that it's all up to the lawyers and the judges now, because I think the law is clear that we have the authority to terminate. Because if you accept the fact that we do not have the authority to terminate his disaster emergency without his approval, that puts us in a position where we are now, that entire emergency services management code puts us in the position where a governor could get elected, declare a disaster emergency on the first day, and then continue on all by himself as long as he keeps 17 senators in his camp for a total term of 4 years and rule like a dictator like this. That, in my mind, again, I'm not a lawyer, okay? But in my mind, that triggers a challenge based on Article 4, Section 4 of the U.S. Constitution, which guarantees us a Republican form of government, which does not depend on one governor and a tiny minority of the entire General Assembly ruling with an iron fist.
So thank you again. This is Rob Norgan. I have a two-part question. The first is, I think we could all agree that, like you said, you think it was benevolent at first. That's fine. I could maybe agree with that. But given what we know now, and we still see Wolf and his team pushing for lockdowns in certain places, doesn't it almost seem intentional and punitive? Like they're encouraging these lockdowns because they think it grants them more power or it helps them politically?
Well, desperate tyrants hold on to power desperately and in desperate ways. And I mean, we can just see by his announcement yesterday, we're trying to get to the bottom of the actual figures, but he kept Dauphin County, which is right next door to Lebanon County, he put him in the green in his, whenever that date is that's going to happen. But he kept Lebanon in the yellow. Well, the Dauphin County people, they were with us at first when we said we were going to go yellow without him, but then they kind of backed down. But here in Lebanon, we've been strong. So is that retaliatory? Is it actually based on science, or is it just based on political science? So, I mean, at this point in time, I think he's desperately holding on to any vestige of legitimacy and credibility that he does have. And I want to tell you that his credibility is waning. When you asked that question about the mask and he gave that 1 minute answer that began and ended with, "I'm not a lawyer," I think that was clear that his credibility is falling fast. And and that's why I took that clip from his press conference and reposted it, because I wanted every Pennsylvanian to be able to see that. That quickly got 100,000 views, I think within less than 24 hours. And we specifically need people to see that kind of hemming and hawing when you're asked a direct question about a very, very simple policy.
Yeah, and just a quick follow-up to that. Given that, like what we're talking about, him kind of trying to be a dictator, what do you think about his comments about Pennsylvania? There being, Carlos, you have the direct quote, but basically Pennsylvania.
There are two Pennsylvanias.
One for white.
Right.
One for whites and one for blacks.
Yeah, I think that's a ridiculously divisive comment.
We're in denial. We're in denial, Representative. We're in denial. That's what he said. It flies in the face of something I'm trying to work on right now, right under the governor's nose, which is some labor and police reform, which I am putting a bridge up and trying to build a bridge with members of the Black Caucus on. We're doing that right under his nose. And it's because we work in the same room and we are friendly to each other and we don't treat each other any different than just on the level of we're human beings. That sort of, look, the whole racial thing, I think, and I wrote a column about this for our local news source, Lebtown. You can go look it up. But the whole thing about how you viewed the George Floyd incident will influence
the way you view the whole race issue in Pennsylvania right now. Did you view that as a black man being killed by a white man? Did you view that as a policeman being viewed killing a regular citizen? Did you view that as two men as opposed to two women? For me, I viewed that as one individual with constitutional standing taking the rights away from another individual with constitutional standing under color of law. If you view it that way first, you are far less likely to buy into the whether it's your black versus white argument or your cops versus citizens argument. If you have to look at these situations first in an unbiased and objective manner, because otherwise you will not come out with an unbiased and an objective viewpoint on the backside of whatever solution you're going to find.
My last question, Representative, and to go back to what you said about Todd's question, we're very proud of him, you know. And he asks some very, very good questions. And yes. Because I think that he can really tap into what the people are feeling and asking.
Right.
If you had a magic wand and you were able to invite the governor over to your finished porch, after you finished there, and it was just you and him, and you had an hour, give me a short outline as to what you would say to him. I mean, tell me your pitch. Tell me your humanity, your Russell Diamondness, if I could,
okay.
as to what you would say to him to get him to understand or to work together more than anything to solve the problem.
I would say to him, I'd say, I understand your desires, and I understand even your desires to support your political agenda. But here's what you've missed out on. You've missed out on hearing from all the people I've heard from, and still are hearing from, because your unemployment system has left them high and dry. You have missed the chats I've had with my good friend down the street who owns a restaurant with a liquor license, who has now been effectively out of business for 3 months and has exhausted his personal savings in trying to just hold on long enough. I would say to him, let's go down and let's not sit here on my porch as two politicians. Let's go down and talk to Dave Rotunda at the Patdorf restaurant. Let me take you to Kevin Lazan and his wife, Lauren, who got the double whammy because their house burned down on March 11th, and they are living with their 5 children, literally in a camper down by the river. Let's go talk to him. He was out of work as an independent concrete contractor for so long until May 1st, and he got nothing despite the fact that his house burned down too. Come and talk to the real people with me, because I just want to show you that living in the ivory tower, as you have during your entire governor's term, and as you had prior to becoming governor, has not served you well. You need to communicate with real people who are not wearing suits every day, who are out there just struggling to make ends meet, live their life, and put food on their family's table with dignity. I just don't think, Governor, that you get what it's like to live in the real world. I don't want to tell you, I want to show you. And after that, I'd probably my opening line would be, what the hell were you thinking?
Todd?
Representative Russ Diamond, thank you so much for taking the time on a Saturday. We know you're busy. Cannot wait to see. Now, see, we've seen the before photos. Can we see the after and do the big reveal where we have the bus in front of the house and we roll the bus back and then see what the new front of the Diamond House look like?
I will do that. If you follow my personal Facebook page, you will see that. And I've got some pictures of before. This is a 5-year project, okay? I totally did the inside, and I'm totally doing the outside, building a whole new porch. I will show you the before and after. You go, wow, that was a ghetto house, and now it looks great. I would love that. And Todd, thank you so much for the work you're doing. I can't tell you, when I got a phone call from you, I couldn't tell you how thrilled I was to hear from a reporter who's actually doing the work that the journalist should be doing. So thank you so much, Todd. I really appreciate what you're doing.
You're very kind, and we look forward to having you back.
All right. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you, Representative.
All right. Have a good day.
So, Todd, I guess the one thing I'd like to ask you is, what in your mind happens next? What happens next with respect to the governor and the shutdown and the legislature? Having this fight. Must we establish a total force of civil disobedience to push back against any of these wayward politicians who abuse their power? Or, give us an insight, being that you're at the front line.
Is that after I go gather myself, after hearing those just amazing, humbling words from a state representative in Russ Diamond and Senator Mastriano, and then our local Lycoming County folks have also, that are in the state, have echoed that. A lot of the staff at the state level has also echoed that on the governor's team, the secretary's team, that I'm not doing this to be disrespectful to the governor. I'm not doing it to be disrespectful, Secretary of Health. I'm there, as we mentioned last week, for regular Pennsylvanians. I'm trying to get those answers that apparently, and Representative Diamond just mentioned it, that nobody until I got there was asking of the governor or the Secretary of Health. I mean, that's humbling, man. I mean, and to see the way it's gone on social media, on all the other media outlets, picking up on the dialogues that have begun with the people I've already mentioned, based on those questions and their responses. That's a humbling deal, man. I'm not there to make a name for myself. I'm just asking the questions that come to my mind, that I think regular Pennsylvanians, when they hear their elected officials and appointed leaders, when they hear them speak, those are the questions that are coming to their minds. So to your point, what happens next? There have now been mutual filings, right? State Senate went to Commonwealth Court, which I believe has the ultimate jurisdiction. The governor went to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, filed a King's Bench authority, which I think is the most ironic twist in this whole thing. We've had Scaringi on this show. Scaringi went to the King's Bench. Nobody knew what a King's Bench was till he brought it up, and they wanted the governor to be overruled on that. Well, the Supreme Court in Pennsylvania ruled King's Bench authority stays with the governor. So now the governor is on the defensive. He's going back going, well, I am the King's Bench. We have to use it again to keep my power. I just thought that was the biggest ironic twist. I think Commonwealth Court weighs in first. The briefs are due by the 18th, which is this Thursday. And then the Supreme Court is exactly where Governor Wolf went to. Why? Because he's won at that level. He wants the immediate injunctive relief to keep everything status quo. I think somebody asked the general counsel, Mr. Schwab, in real time during a Wednesday press conference, do you plan to seek injunctive relief, immediate injunctive relief? Do you guys have any idea who that person was?
That would be you.
I'm
just checking.
So I'd like to ask this question to Todd, but then I would like to have Rob come in as a cleanup hitter and address it politically on the back end. Explain to me, Todd, you've been following the story a solid 12 weeks, right?
Easily 12 weeks.
How will the virus know to automatically resurge in the fall?
Carlos, it is the most novel coronavirus ever in the history of the planet. It knows exactly when not to go after people in protests. It knows exactly which people to go after. and it knows exactly when certain candidates that are running for elective office are going to hold rallies. So all of a sudden, the resurgence is there of the novel coronavirus. Meanwhile, the nursing homes that it is devastating in continue to stay vulnerable.
Rob?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? What this shows is that they were never serious in the first place, that this was a naked power grab. And I had been predicting for a long time that the establishment on both sides, but particularly the Democratic Party, and we could see this in the form of governors like Tom Wolf, they were going to do everything possible to destroy the economy, to make the country as bad as possible, to help their election chances in the 2020 election. And people said, oh, that's just a crazy conspiracy. They wouldn't do that. Well, how else do you explain that 1,200 health experts, the same people we were told we have to trust implicitly, we can't question, they've signed off now saying, actually, coronavirus is still deadly and you're still a terrible person who wants to kill grandma if you want to go to your job and provide for your family. But if you want to go have a protest about one cop who killed one person in Minneapolis, many of which lead to riots, that's okay, because racism is a bigger virus than the coronavirus. So that virus, that was going to kill 2.2 million of us, according to the Imperial College study, those 2.2 million deaths, that's not as serious as going out there and burning down and looting stores over the death of George Floyd. That's what they want us to believe. Now, remember, every time they tell you and they point to the experts, these are the same group of people they're talking about. So when they say, well, we need a Green New Deal that takes away all of fossil fuel industry, that pays people that don't feel like working, that totally reimagines our country and makes it this socialist paradise. Why? Because the experts say if we don't do it, we're all going to die of climate change. It's the exact same garbage. They use this appeal to authority. They control these institutions in and out when it comes to academia and these other institutions. And so they tell you blatant lies like, oh, if you're out there standing shoulder to shoulder like Governor Wolf and you're protesting against police brutality, that's totally cool and the virus won't spread. But if you're out there protesting because you want to be able to go feed your family, all of a sudden that spreads the virus. And look, if you're one of the people that for whatever reason you only care about people of a certain race, are you aware of the fact that now studies show that over 40% of black-owned businesses may never open up again because of the lockdowns of the coronavirus? But I guess it didn't matter that we were protesting for those black-owned businesses as well. We didn't differentiate racially. We said it's a shame for all Pennsylvanians and for all Americans that are going through undue pain because of these lockdowns. But for some reason, that's not important. Those black-owned businesses that lost their businesses and never reopened, that's less important than protesting about a cop that killed George Floyd.
And that's the bottom line. Is it political? Is it completely and totally political? Tom?
Yeah. Oh, God, Tom.
Let me defer to Robert real quick, and Carlos, go ahead and do what you need to do. And Rob and I'll go back and forth on this particular topic here for just a second. But first to you, Rob.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is all political. I think, look, Tucker Carlson's getting heat right now, and a bunch of his advertisers are being attacked, and they're pulling out of his show because he said Black Lives Matter and what we see going on right now isn't about Black lives. So let me be a little more specific of what I think Tucker was trying to say. All of us agree that Black lives matter. We also agree that Hispanic lives matter, white lives matter, Asian lives matter. We all agree. There is selective outrage being pushed by people in the establishment that want to make political hay. They want things like to control us more. They want things like to get rid of a police force that they're not able to control. They control 95% of our institutions, such as the media, academia, social media companies, the entertainment industry. That's not enough. They want 100% control. And so they selectively push these stories when the data doesn't back up their arguments. We hear about how the police are hunting and killing unarmed black men. Well, last year it was 9. 9 people in the black community were unarmed and killed by police. So even if we assume, which isn't true, but if we assume that all of those deaths were illegitimate and it was just police murdering, we have no evidence that it was for racial reasons. We know that more whites were killed than blacks. And we know that there were 7,000 odd blacks that were actually victims of homicide, the vast majority of which was black on black crime. But no one seems to, they don't have rallies for that. They don't speak up for that. That's because this is a naked political maneuver as far as I'm concerned. And what we're saying when people say this isn't what Black Lives Matter is about, just black lives, it's because it's become a political movement. So when you ask them, what do you have a problem with? They say, we need to dismantle capitalism because capitalism means inequity. We need to dismantle the police. Well, if you were concerned about black lives, you wouldn't dismantle a system that's been one of the best systems for people around the world, not just black people, but including black people, the systems of capitalism and private property and free markets and things like that. And you certainly wouldn't want to disband the police, that when there is a black homicide victim, who do the families of those homicide victims go to for justice? They go to the police. Does that mean we shouldn't have, look at when there's cases of police brutality or make adjustments? Of course not. But when they're being this political and advocating for this type of revolution, it's clear that it's about more than just, oh, we're just concerned about the black lives that were lost to police. It's clear that this is a political motivation.
So, Rob, I've given this a lot of thought, and some folks have asked me about why I've been relatively quiet on social media about this particular topic, and here's why. I don't think I need to go out there and pound on my chest about how supportive I am of a movement that potentially is being hijacked by people that just want to see the world burn, right? To say three particular words, right? I have relationships with people all over the globe of all walks of life, all nationalities, all race, color, creed. Do I really have to go out and bang on my chest about one particular group when I have those dialogues going on a pretty regular, if not daily basis? So to me, when we see what's going on right now in and around the United States and paying attention, this is my question. Why did it take an unspeakable act in Minnesota for people to all of a sudden wake up to the fact that we should pay attention to each other?
Well, yeah,
that act was absolutely horrendous. Horrendous. It should never happen to anybody. Take all of the race out of it. Take all of the, as Representative Diamond said,
yep.
Take everything out of the equation. It was wrong. You're putting a knee on somebody for upwards of 9 minutes.
Yep.
That shouldn't happen to anybody. Ever. So now we're having this dialogue about, well, it's a police issue, it's a race issue. I hate to quote somebody, but let's go back to the Rodney King riots. Why can't we all just get along? So I use that as the premise, right? And I pose the question humbly and honestly to the governor. If somebody's trying to grow as a person and figure this out, right, that may have questions for the first time of, am I being a certain way towards certain people? Am I doing this wrong? Am I right? How do I grow? So I asked the governor, how do you start the dialogue in that light if you're trying to improve? And he came back with, there's 2 Pennsylvanias. That's a loaded answer. So if it's already being,
no, it's not a loaded answer. It's not.
If it's framed that way, we're never going to grow.
It's a political point. It's a talking point, and that's the problem. His exact quote was, "We have to stop being in denial that there are 2 Pennsylvanias." I mean,
did he say
not
one
be
for
more divisive?
Did he say one for whites and one for blacks?
Yes. You
Okay.
could not be more divisive figuratively as well as picturesquely. You couldn't.
I don't want this to be lost. I don't want this to be lost in this whole conversation. I, early on in the process, endorsed the person for mayor in the race last year that has become the first African-American mayor in history of Williamsport. I endorsed that person. I've also been called a racist in court papers. Which is it?
Right. So there is a person that all of us know that will remain unnamed. Um, the anecdote I'm about to tell you happened this week, and he was in his office and he walked across the street to go to the bank. It was a very hot day, and as he was walking across the street, there was road work happening, and he saw that there were people and the flag crew and the whole thing. And as he walked by the flag crew, he nodded to the flag crew guy, and he said, "Wow, you guys are really hot. You look like you're suffering out here. Can I get you guys some water?" And they kind of just like murmured and didn't really answer him. So he went to the bank, did his thing, came back to his office, and got a couple of cups of water, of ice water, and he went out and he gave them to the flag person. And the flag person took the water, looked at it, and said, and I quote, "Is this water poisoned? You can't be too careful these days." And the person, our mutual friend, said, "No, our spirit is." The flag man was black. Our friend is white. You can now not do the right thing regardless without being under suspicion. This is what Black Lives Matters has done. Exactly this. It's a lie. Like, Coke. It's the real thing. That's a lie too. Rob?
Yeah, I mean, it's a marketing ploy. That's what's going on. And one of the things that you see throughout history, you could see is go back and read your dialogues of Plato and understand when Socrates was debating people, the importance of getting people to define terms. Because when you have a group such as Black Lives Matter, at face value, everyone agrees. Yeah, of course, Black Lives Matter, of course. Who would disagree with that? But it means more than that. And they're allowed to be vague about it. So in one context, it's like, well, Black Lives Matter means we need to end the systems of white supremacy and capitalism. And you're like, oh, no, I'm not for that. I don't want to tear down the entire United States project. And then it allows them to switch to the other definition and say, oh, you don't care about black lives. Well, of course that's not the case. Or they say defund the police. And they'll say, well, defund the police means abolish the police. And you're like, well, no, I'm not for that. I think that we could have some simple, defunding. And they say, oh, yeah, that's what we mean. Just, address it. Or when they say systemic racism, you're like, well, what's systemic racism? Well, everyone will define it in a different way. And they change that definition in order to win these arguments. In reality, what's going on is this is intentionally being used to cause division. Look, they're selectively pushing these stories. You can't even blame people for believing it. For example, almost an identical case to what we saw happen with George Floyd happened to a schizophrenic gentleman named Tony Timpa in 2016. Timpa's case in some ways was worse because he wasn't even accused of a crime. He called the police on himself and was handcuffed by security when police got there. Yet, in a very similar fashion, they sat in his back, they laughed about it, there was 4 officers, and he ended up suffocating and dying. Yet there wasn't national outrage. Well, why? Because the establishment, the groups like the media or institutions like academia, they didn't push the story. And so what I say to, my black fellow Americans out there is, I understand that this story is being pushed and you have the right to be outraged. But I think if you look and question, why are the very people that helped keep the black community down so long, places like Chase Bank, places like Amazon, politicians, remember, this is occurring in almost exclusively Democrat-controlled neighborhoods. Why are those very people pushing the same message you are? Do you think it's a coincidence that all these corporations are out there saying Black Lives Matter right now? Don't you think that it's a little odd that you're impugning the systems of capitalism, but the very corporations that are exploiting people more than just the average mom and pop stores, that are places like Chase Bank that's been in trouble for predatory lending to the African American community, they're out there paying lip service to your movement saying Black Lives Matter? And by the way, don't you think that it's a little bit insulting that people that I personally know from my communities can't wait to fall over themselves screaming about their white privilege and how Black Lives Matter, but they don't do anything. They're not going to the inner city and volunteering, or if they are, they're not doing it that much. it's become this sort of currency where, because all of these institutions are controlled by this mantra of Black Lives Matter, now all you have to do is say it, and that makes you a good person. So instead of actually going out there and having difficult conversations and saying, I think I can speak for all three of us, I think it's incredibly destructive that our country has allowed these cities to fall apart in the way they did, both if it's cases of police brutality or just regular homicides and violence. We should be doing something as a country. But instead of having difficult conversation and coming up with real world solutions like we're trying to do, instead it's to the point where, well, all you have to do is say Black Lives Matter. And if you speak up against anything in that agenda, then clearly you're a racist. And it's leading to the toxicity that you're talking about, Carlos. Who's now muted, if he could hear me. But yeah, Todd, I mean, what is your feeling on, like, I think you would agree with me that in the factual statement that yes, Black Lives Matter, but do you think it's become to mean more than just that obvious statement?
But see that, Rob, and we agree on this, okay? So when anybody hears that, to me, it's a loaded phrase, okay? Because if you don't take the knee, if you don't do what they tell you to do or ask you to do, okay, you're openly racist. Wrong. Sorry, wrong. And here's why. This community several years ago put together twice in 3 years here in Lycoming County, put 53-foot tractor trailers of hurricane relief supplies together for Eastern North Carolina. Rob, you're not going to believe this. There are Black families that live in Eastern North Carolina that lost everything.
Right.
There are white families that lost everything in the hurricanes in Eastern North Carolina. There are folks of all nationalities, race, color, and creed. Did that matter to anybody or any company that made the donations and put things on those tractor trailers? No. They wanted to help people that lost everything in a hurricane. Moms, dads, grandpa, aunts, uncle, kids, right? The whole 9 yards. They wanted to help people get back on their feet regardless of their walk of life. If this community in Lycoming County can do that, and we saw it across the nation and across the globe, I'm so sick and tired of the divisive nature of this rhetoric. For those of you that need the understanding of what that means, I'm sick and tired of people trying to tear us apart by what they're saying, by their words. We work together, we live together, we worship together, we play together. We're meant to be together.
We marry.
Right? We're together.
So,
and I got news for you. The idiosyncrasies and the differences that we call them, the differences, the different cultures we come from, it's what makes us great.
Exactly right. So I wanted to let you know, and our viewers and our listeners know that, and I just sent you the email, Todd, if you could send them the Zoom invite. Attorney Joshua Prince, who is a huge Second Amendment attorney in the state of Pennsylvania, is about to come on, and we're going to talk a little bit about the Second Amendment. And you know my concerns, Robert, with respect to what's happening right now and people and guns and defending themselves in the Castle Doctrine. So as soon as Joshua comes on, or as soon as I should say, Todd sends him the invite via email, and the whole Zoom process.
Right.
Do you have, by the way, one of the things that I was joking with someone today was that in this brave new world of telecommunications, the new normal is being on Zoom and having your dogs or your kids come in and be part of the Zoom call. That's just America. I mean, this is what it is. And to Todd's point about his frustration, that I wish that these people understood. It's an imperfect republic. It's imperfect. Nothing is perfect. And the question that I'd like to be able to address to you, Robert, specifically, if you could really hammer this question: who is the mob? As a matter of fact, hold that question.
Right.
We have Attorney Joshua Prince joining us. Joshua, are you there?
I am. Thanks for having me.
I'll tell the story of how we got you on later, but I am so thankful and grateful that you've done this. Todd Bartley is a journalist here from Williamsport, and Rob Knorr lives in Clarion County, and all of us are Constitution Bill of Rights guys. That awesome. And the name of our show is Pushback, because we're just not going to back down. And we know that you're one of those guys. And I asked you to come on today because there's an issue that I think is really important that I think that you could probably cover in detail about a concern that a lot of Americans have in the United States, specifically here in Pennsylvania also, is, let's say you're a 50-year-old man and your son is in the military as a police officer, or you have a son that has guns, because we're an open carry state, and he brings over an AR-15 or a shotgun or a Glock for your protection. Could you walk us through the permutations of the good and the bad of someone lending you a gun in your own house, and how that affects the Castle Doctrine and et al.?
Sure. So one of the first things that's important to understand is that what I'm going to discuss is relative only to Pennsylvania law. Each state's laws are going to be different. So to the extent you have viewers, listeners that may be in other states, they definitely want to speak with competent counsel in their state about their laws there. You also can have some interplay of federal law as well when you're transporting firearms into a different state than which you belong. So again, we're not going to talk about those specific issues. We're going to talk about specific to Pennsylvania, where both individuals are here in Pennsylvania. And so in that situation, first and foremost, what you also have to understand is that Pennsylvania defines a firearm a little bit different than what most people would think. In fact, most attorneys don't even realize what the definition of a firearm is here in Pennsylvania. And I've actually been brought in to consult with very esteemed criminal defense attorneys who were ready to plead their clients guilty of offenses that the client didn't actually commit, just because they assumed that they knew what a firearm was. So here in Pennsylvania, when we're talking about an individual who is not a prohibited person, meaning they're not prohibited under state or federal law from purchasing, possessing, utilizing firearms and ammunition, those types of firearms are limited to basically handguns and short-barreled rifles, short-barreled shotguns. So your regular rifles and shotguns, when we're talking about a non-prohibited person, are not firearms under Pennsylvania law. So that's first and foremost to understand. So generally, for our purposes today, since we'll probably not be talking about National Firearms Act weapons that are regulated by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, it's basically a handgun. So here in Pennsylvania, because rifles and shotguns do not constitute firearms, as long as you have no reason to believe that the person you want to lend that rifle or shotgun to is a prohibited person, you can lawfully lend that firearm to that person. Now, obviously, they could be a non-prohibited person, but have nefarious intent to use that firearm in some sort of criminal endeavor. And obviously, if you had knowledge of that, you could be held liable by, basically as in a conspiracy type of charge, inchoate crime, if you knew that they were going to use that firearm in an unlawful manner. But provided you don't believe that they're a prohibited person, you have no reason to believe they're a prohibited person, and you don't believe that they're going to use the firearm unlawfully, well, I should say the rifle or shotgun unlawfully, you may lawfully lend that rifle or shotgun to them. When we turn to what Pennsylvania calls a firearm, so again, for our purposes, a handgun, there the analysis is slightly different. Under Pennsylvania law, we cannot lend a handgun to someone, aka a firearm, unless that person has a license to carry firearms, which is our concealed carry permit. So you need to be aware of that because otherwise you would be committing a crime by lending a handgun to someone who does not have that license to carry. Years and years ago, I got brought into a situation, and it kind of touches on what your original question to me was, where there was a break into a home, and the homeowner ends up using a handgun on the intruder and kills him. And the police come. He does not comply with my rule number one, never to speak to the police. He starts speaking to the police, and the officer, is talking with him and says, I'm just trying to gather some information, trying to figure out what all happened here. And the homeowner says, I am so thankful to my neighbor, Jimmy. And the officer says, why are you thankful to your neighbor, Jimmy? Well, Jimmy, 2 months ago was telling me about these break-ins that have been happening in the neighborhood. And, I didn't know about this, and I never had a gun before. And Jimmy lent me this gun. And if it wasn't for Jimmy, I could be dead right now. And the officer says, wow, that's phenomenal. That's great that you have a great friend like that. Do you have a license to carry? And the homeowner says, well, no, I had a firearm in my home. I didn't need a license to carry in order to have a loaded firearm in my home, did I? And the officer says, no, but you did in order to be lent a handgun. So now the homeowner has just admitted to a crime, and the home invasion situation was completely justified, but now the homeowner gets charged in relation to the unlawful transfer of that handgun. So, it is very concerning, and listeners need to be aware of that. That's one example of how all of a sudden it became known to law enforcement that this firearm had been lent unlawfully to the homeowner. Had he not spoken to police, they would not likely have been able to establish that there was that unlawful lending of that handgun. So, all the listeners really need to be aware of that. The other thing I just wanted to touch on is you had mentioned open carry. And this is an issue I try to hold a little bit closer to the chest, because I don't want a lot of our district attorneys to become aware of it, that although we do have case law from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court stating that open carry is lawful in the Commonwealth, with the exception of in Philadelphia, unless you have a license to carry firearms, meaning in Philadelphia to open carry, you must have that license to carry firearms. The problem is, in that case, it was Commonwealth versus Hawkins. The PA Supreme Court was not confronted with Pennsylvania's transportation laws that are found in Section 6106 of the Crimes Code. Why is that important? Well, under the transportation laws, if you do not have a license to carry firearms, you may only go to and from very specific locations. And if you stop or, deviate at all and don't go directly to or from that location, you've just violated the law. Violation of that law is a misdemeanor of the first degree, which will trigger a federal prohibition whereby you will now be prohibited for the rest of your life from being able to purchase and possess firearms and ammunition. So one of the allowances, let me say, under the transportation law is you can go from your home to the range and back. So let's say you go to the range, put some lead down range, meet up with your buddy, and you both say, hey, on the way home, let's grab a bite to eat. And you do that, and you don't have a license to carry firearms, you just violated the law. And I know what a lot of your listeners are probably saying, hey, Josh, come on. What's the likelihood of law enforcement finding out about this? Well, we've had a number of instances where this exact scenario has unfolded. In fact, we had one case out of Philadelphia, so probably the listeners already know what the outcome was. But the individual goes to the range. He's actually practicing his draw at the range, leaves the range, firearm and ammunition in separate compartments in his trunk. No dispute by law enforcement over that. On his way home, remembers that he had called in a prescription to CVS. CVS is literally on the same road as his home. The only deviation he has to make is making a left into the parking lot of CVS. He goes into CVS, goes back to the technician, gets his prescription, and he's heading out. And by all accounts, this is something out of a movie. You have all these squad cars flying up, slamming on the brakes, all the cops jumping out, guns out. Where's the gun? Where's the gun? Where's the gun? He said, what are you talking? What gun? Where's the gun? Where's the gun? Where's the gun? Eventually, everyone figures out that what had happened was the technician saw an empty holster on his hip because he was practicing his draw and didn't take it off after he left the range. So she called it in as a man with a gun. Now, police would then say, well, we want to see where the gun is. They'd look in his trunk, confirm firearm and ammunition, separate compartments, not loaded or that. But then it's the next question that they ask him. Can we see your license to carry firearms? He says, oh, I don't have a license to carry firearms. He ended up being convicted of that offense. Now, there was a separate instance in Northampton County where there was an individual who was a paramedic, known in the community, known by law enforcement, all of that, who is on his way to the range and gets a call from a close family friend that she's a victim of domestic violence. She's called the police, but it's a rural area. There are no local police, and they said state police are only, 45 minutes away. So she calls him. He immediately goes over to pick her up to get her out of that situation. Just about as she's getting in, a township next to theirs has a local police department that responds. And of course, our client knows the officer from being a paramedic. Guy comes up to him, hey, what's going on? And he says, I came to pick her up because they said state police are only 45 minutes away. She needed to get out of the situation. And the officer asked one of the questions that I always love, is there anything in the vehicle I need to know about? And again, he broke Josh's rule number one. He spoke to the police and he says, yeah, I have all these firearms in the back. I was headed to the range and, got this call. So the officer does not want to charge him, but his chief directs him to file charges against him for violating the transportation laws. In this instance, we go in front of the magisterial district judge. And when he hears this, he's so incensed by the prosecution that he throws out the charges and tells the law enforcement officer that if they ever bring such stupid charges again in his court, that they'll never win any prosecution in the future. Now, legally speaking, that isn't, exactly the right outcome, because with a magisterial district judge, he's only supposed to determine whether there's reasonable suspicion of a crime having occurred, or whether it's probable, let me say, whether there probable cause exists that it's likely that this individual committed this crime. And if so, regardless of any defenses that he may have, it has to be bound over to the Court of Common Pleas. Here, this judge basically said that he wasn't going to have any of that and just threw out the charges right from the start. But I just want the listeners to know that although in that situation, I do believe the client had defenses we could have argued legitimately and potentially won on, this was an unusual situation where the magisterial district judge basically went above and beyond his powers. But I think it's important for everyone to understand that, when I have a client who tells me that they want to open carry, and I'm a supporter of open carry, I tell them, you have to go out and get your license to carry firearms, because it gives you so many exceptions under the law. And as I alluded to earlier, if you have that license to carry, the transportation laws don't apply to you. So it is the best form of, in essence, insurance that you can get for yourself. It's $20 for 5 years. So as long as you aren't prohibited from being able to get a license to carry firearms, even if you never want to conceal carry a firearm or keep a loaded handgun in your vehicle, go out and get it, because it really does give you a bunch of exceptions. The other one, and a lot of people aren't aware of it, is anytime a state of emergency is declared, all open carry is prohibited unless you have a license to carry firearms once again. And probably most of the viewers are unaware that for virtually close to 2 years now, we've been under a state of emergency here because of the opioid issue, that Governor Wolf has issued these opioid state of emergencies that he keeps renewing. And as a result of those proclamations, open carry is prohibited unless you have that license to carry firearms. So all your listeners, viewers, if you're eligible for a license to carry, go out and get it. It is the best form of insurance against prosecution you can have. It is state issued ID. You can use it to identify yourself if you need to. Also, if there's any listeners that are kind of worried that, they don't want their name appearing in the newspaper because they went out to get a license to carry, here in Pennsylvania, we have really great protections over all of that information. So all license to carry firearms applicant information is confidential, not subject to disclosure. It's a felony of the 3rd degree to solicit the information and as well to disclose the information. There are also civil penalties associated with the disclosure of the information. An individual who has their information disclosed is entitled to either 3 times their actual damages. So if they lose their job or something as a result where they can establish actual damages, they're entitled to 3 times those actual damages. Or if they can't establish actual damages, they're entitled to $1,000 statutory damage per disclosure, plus attorney's fees and costs. So we really do have some phenomenal protections in that regard. And that's why I tell everyone, go out and get that license to carry, even if you, never want to conceal carry. Also, I do speak with a lot of females who say, I don't feel comfortable carrying a gun right now. And I said, that's fine. You don't have to just because you have that license to carry. But if all of a sudden you have a stalker come into your life, you might be surprised at how comfortable, how quickly you feel carrying that firearm. And since you'd already have that license, you could immediately go to carrying that firearm. So I do think that's very important. And the last thing I just want to mention to your listeners and viewers is we can never, ever have a loaded rifle or shotgun in a vehicle. Regardless of whether you have a license to carry firearms, you can never have a loaded rifle or shotgun in your vehicle. Literally, the reason is the General Assembly believes we will poach Bambi if we have a loaded rifle or shotgun in the vehicle. And that is the sole reason for that prohibition. And under the game code, there are actually violations where you can lose your hunting privileges for years just for simply having a loaded rifle or shotgun leaning up against your vehicle. So make sure everyone's aware of that.
Just real quick, can you just let people know where they could go to get their permit and any costs that are associated with it?
Sure. So you just go to your county sheriff, the county in which you reside, and there is a statewide application process. The form is generated by the Pennsylvania State Police. It's a single-page form by statute. And so you just go to your sheriff's department. Now, obviously, due to COVID, there have been some changes in the processes. So I always suggest giving a call to your sheriff's department. Some are now allowing you to submit it through the mail, and they process it, and then they'll give you a call and schedule a time for you to come in to get your photograph taken for the license. But generally speaking, in most counties, you would, absent COVID, just simply go to the sheriff's department, fill out the application, submit it there. Most county sheriffs are issuing on the spot, meaning they do the background check. As long as you clear it, they give you the license while you wait. Legally speaking, they have upwards of 45 days. There are counties like Philadelphia that take all 45 days just because they don't want to issue on the spot and that. So be aware of that. And it is $20 for that 5-year license. So again, I think that's the best $20 someone can spend. That's not to necessarily take the place of having different types of insurance in case, God forbid, you are involved in a use of force situation. I know I refer to it kind of as an insurance policy, but that's because in my mind, I'm talking about its exceptions that it gives you from criminal prosecution in so many different regards.
You got something else, Robert?
No, that was it. I think that's great information. And it's like what we talk about in our show a lot, that most people want to be law abiding. It's just there's so many complications that the average person, it's tough to find a place to get information like this. So I'm really glad you came on and explained that, because I didn't know more than half of what you're talking about. So I know that's probably true of a lot of our listeners. So
Same here, Todd.
And the other thing I want everyone to understand is these laws are so complex that 99.999% of the attorneys don't understand them. You see all these attorneys saying that they do firearms law issues and that they handle firearms crimes. They don't have the first clue about it. They think just because they're a criminal defense attorney that they must know. And every single day I speak with clients who ask their attorney, well, it's only a misdemeanor. If I plead guilty to this, I'm going to be okay. Attorney tells, oh yeah, it's just a misdemeanor. You don't have to worry about that. Or it's a nonviolent felony. You don't have to worry about it. They plead guilty. Next thing they find out, they're prohibited. And, you know, it comes as a surprise, but stealing over $250 worth of value will trigger a prohibition. You will be prohibited for the remainder of your life from being able to purchase and possess firearms and ammunition. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not supporting theft, and, you know, but still $250, while it's not money you find in the street, it's not grand larceny. To strip someone of a constitutional right. Also, a lot of times someone who gets a second DUI, that second DUI is going to trigger a federal prohibition. I actually have a case pending right now in front of the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, which is the federal circuit court, on that issue. I won a Second Amendment as applied challenge in that situation before the district court, and the U.S. government appealed it up. So we're waiting to see what exactly the Third Circuit's going to do. But it comes as a surprise to most people as how easy it is to become a prohibited person. And so if you have anything in your background, whether it's criminal in nature, whether it's juvenile in nature, whether it's mental health related, if you've ever had an involuntary commitment or such, you know, different types of discharge from the military, protection from abuse orders, all of that, it's really important that you do speak with an attorney who's competent, knows what they're speaking about, before you attempt to purchase a firearm or obtain a license to carry. Because since Sandy Hook back in 2011, we've seen a huge change in how the Pennsylvania State Police treats these incidents. Now, I can almost guarantee you that if you attempt to purchase or obtain a license to carry and are denied, you will be prosecuted, and they will file a felony of the third degree, sworn falsified statements, as well as a misdemeanor of the third degree, unsworn falsified statement charge against you. And it gets real serious real fast. Now, there's, again, arguments that can be made depending on the background, but I'm telling you, it is far cheaper for you to go out and retain an attorney who knows what they're talking about and can give you a determination as to whether or not you're prohibited, and if you are, what options you may have for obtaining relief.
Todd?
Josh, thanks for taking the time here on a Saturday with us. I do have a question to go back to the conversation with law enforcement when they, you know, approach your vehicle, or you're talking about the vehicle and the ability to search, because we used to see this all the time on, you know, shows like Cops and then Live PD, and until they were just recently canceled. You know, if law enforcement does approach you, and I know if you're going to break your rule, it's one of those deals. Do they still have the opportunity, if you say, you know, is there something in the vehicle that I should know about, and you say, I'm not going to talk to you, do they still have the opportunity to search the vehicle?
Only if they have a warrant or you consent to it. So obviously, based on what you're suggesting to me, there's no consent. You're not consenting to the search. So then they're going to need to go and get a warrant. So they need probable cause to get that warrant. And that's what I would suggest, you know, to any of the listeners or viewers that they do. So usually the question becomes, and I kind of walk people through when I do a firearms law seminar, how to handle those interactions with police. Here in Pennsylvania, there is no legal requirement for you to disclose if you have a license to carry when you're pulled over, or if you have a firearm on your person or in your vehicle. What I always suggest you do is when the officer comes up, you have your hands on the wheel. Officer is usually going to ask you a question. Usually that question is, do you know why I stopped you? That officer is looking for you to make an admission. Regardless of what you say, if it's any form of statement, that's going to get written on the back of that ticket, and that will come in against you. So even if you say, I think I was going a little fast, and you don't specify the actual speed, that's still an admission on your part that you were going over the speed limit, and that will come in against you. So I always tell clients to respond to any question with a question. So again, hands on the wheel. Officer comes up. Do you know why I stopped you? Officer, why'd you stop me? Now, the reason I don't advise a client to say no, why did you stop me, is because I don't want my client to potentially be making a false statement to that officer. If you truly knew why he or she stopped you and now you're saying, no, I don't know, technically you're making a false statement to law enforcement. So again, officer comes up. Do you know why I stopped you? Officer, why did you stop me? Then the next question that they usually ask, is there anything in the vehicle I need to know about? I have no idea what this officer thinks he or she may need to know about. Is the fully automatic MP5 that's in my trunk something they need to know about? I don't think so. They may think so. This is a recipe for disaster, quite honestly. And so, again, I always say just respond to a question with a question. At that point, is there anything in the vehicle that I need to know about? Officer, why did you stop me? Am I free to go? And if the officer says no, at that point, you're seized. And at that point, you say, okay, I would like my attorney then. And I know what all your listeners and viewers are saying. Josh, you're guaranteeing me I'm going to get the ticket. Well, I'll say probably so. And I'm going to tell you to do it anyway. The reason I'm going to tell you to do it anyway is because of conditioning. While this may not be that big of an issue, it may be just a traffic ticket. And I will grant you, whoever you are, that you can talk your way out of that traffic ticket. If you condition yourself to speak to the police, when the chips are really down, you will have conditioned yourself to speak to the police. So when someone just broke into your home and you shot them, and now it turns out that it wasn't maybe a justified shoot, depending on the circumstances, maybe it was your roommate who you actually shot, not realizing it was your roommate, and now all of our different doctrines from Castle Doctrine to Stand Your Ground Doctrine wouldn't apply. Again, I don't want you speaking to the police, and you just need to know to shut up. And so, I have had a number of clients who have taken my advice, who have actually either called me or emailed me and said, Josh, I thought I was guaranteed a ticket. I did exactly what you said. Officer said, completely understand. Just slow it down a little bit. Have a good day. So I can't say that every interaction with law enforcement is going to end that way if you do what I say. And I do acknowledge the fact that it's more likely that you will end up with a ticket doing what I say. But I'm telling you, in the long term, it's for your benefit.
It's the balance of compliance with law enforcement and yet the balance of not self-incrimination.
Correct. And most law enforcement officers get it. I'll never forget, I was doing a law enforcement only firearms law training seminar. So I'll go into police departments, sheriff departments, and just do training for them, because I recognize the fact that a lot of law enforcement won't show up to my public firearms law seminars because they don't want to be identified as law enforcement and not knowing the law. So we'll go in and we'll do training for them in their department and that, so that they have, as I call it, the tools for the toolbox, because most of them have absolutely no or very limited training on the firearms laws. And by them knowing the difference between a voluntary commitment, which will not trigger a federal or state disability, versus an involuntary commitment, that gives them a tool for their toolbox. So they can say, listen, you need to go in, you need to get treatment. We need to get you examined. Now, if you agree to it, I'll make sure this is a voluntary commitment whereby you won't lose your rights. But if you're going to force me here, because you're going to end up there and it's going to be involuntary, I'm telling you right now, you're going to lose your rights. So that's some leverage. That's a tool for the toolbox that law enforcement can use to get the proper outcome. Anyway, where I was going with this is, I remember there was one officer that came up to me during the break and she says, I remember I had this instance, we had stopped this guy and we started talking with him, and he's just yammering on, telling me all this stuff, and he's just incriminating himself. Back of my mind, I'm thinking, you need to shut up, buddy. You need to, invoke your rights. But she says, that's not my job. I'm not going to tell him to shut up. I'm here to write down whatever he's telling. But why I give that story is most law enforcement appreciate our constitutional rights. And if you invoke them, they're not going to do anything negative in relation to it. You may even find that they appreciate that, and you may even end up walking away without a ticket, whereas otherwise you may have ended up with a ticket.
Well, Josh, I love you, but the zeitgeist is not telling us that. I do have a question, and this is so illuminating, and I know, and Rob and Todd will agree, we can do just 2 hours with you, but I know you got to go. But I'd like to end this on this question. Can you walk us again between the difference or define what open carry in Pennsylvania means, okay, which in a lot of people's mind, and I'm just saying what people think, I can take a holster and take a gun and put it in my holster and walk out and go to the restaurant and go and eat. What is the difference between that and having a concealed permit to carry?
Okay. So with open carry, what it is not defined in the law. So it doesn't say open carry is this. Basically, what open carry is understood to mean is that the firearm is visible on your person, meaning it's not covered up by a shirt, a jacket, anything like that. And there have been instances where people were open carrying and their shirt apparently, because they're running or something, covers up their firearm, and then they get stopped by the police and they didn't even know it. Well, now they have a concealed firearm, and that's a huge issue. So it's, again, generally the idea that the firearm is open and visible to someone. Anytime you get on any mode of conveyance, and you got to think very broadly here. So you put on rollerblades, you're on a mode of conveyance. You get on a horse, you're on a mode of conveyance. You get on your tractor, you're on a mode of conveyance. Even if you think you're open carrying because everyone could see it, you're not. Because as soon as you're on any mode of conveyance, you must have a license to carry firearms in order to have a loaded firearm on your person or in that mode of conveyance. I can't hear you.
You're muted, Carlos.
A concealed permit, you mean?
Well, yeah, here in Pennsylvania, we call our concealed carry permit a license to carry firearms.
Perfect.
So, yes, anytime you want to do that, again, you must have that license to carry firearms. And the other thing, again, just be aware, is as I alluded to earlier, the transportation laws still come into effect. And so your example of going to your restaurant, arguably you're transporting that firearm between your home and that restaurant. And if you don't have that license to carry firearms, although you're open carrying, you are likely violating the transportation laws because there is no exception for going from your home to a restaurant and back.
Unless you walk.
Doesn't matter.
So I can't walk out of my house, Gunsmoke style, with a holster on my hip, and walk down to the restaurant with a gun in my holster.
If you don't have a license to carry firearms because of the transportation laws.
Yeah.
And that's why I said in the Supreme Court has said open carry is lawful, but in that case, Commonwealth versus Hawkins, what was not presented to the PA Supreme Court is what is the interplay with the transportation laws. The individual in that case wasn't charged with a violation of the transportation laws. And that's why I said I kind of hold this issue close to my chest, because I don't want a lot of district attorneys to find out about it, because a lot of our people all of a sudden could start being prosecuted because they think, oh, open carry, it's lawful. I have a court case in my favor. It's good. Yeah, but they weren't addressing the transportation laws.
Right. So again, another example of what words are important. Open carry conveys one idea, but in Pennsylvania, it's a completely different idea. Is that not right, Robert?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, you could see how, even like we were talking about the definition of firearm, it seems, right? Like, it seems like I would have just assumed, oh, firearm, my shotgun, my 270, that's a firearm, but those are different under the Pennsylvania law. And yeah, I think that's one of the things that makes it real difficult for an average citizen to just kind of wrap their head around the specific nuances that really apply when you get into one of these legal situations.
Josh,
Now,
we're gonna go ahead.
Just real quick, just to give your listeners, viewers, an example where it would arguably be legal is if they walked away from their home to go to their gun range and they walked directly to the gun range and back. Well, that is an exception under Section 6106 as a lawful way to transport. And there they would arguably be protected. There would be no violation. It's just when you go to a location that is not specified in Section 6106B that you run into this issue. And as I said, this isn't a minor issue. If you get convicted of this, you're looking at being prohibited for the rest of your life from being able to purchase and possess firearms and ammunition.
I will say this to you, and we're gonna let you go. I am stunned by the level of literacy that you've given today, and we thank you so much for coming on. we will definitely have you back on. It was so illuminating and so informative. We are in your debt, and our friend Joe Stearns, I'm going to have to send him a care package. Thank you so much, Josh.
Sure, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Josh.
Stay safe out there.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks.
So, Robert, we have a half hour left.
Yeah.
Can you address, I think, and it's so funny that Josh was just talking about the nomenclature of what one thing that we think means one thing and what it really means. So give us some literacy and explain to us in what's happening in our country right now, who is the mob?
Right. So there's a question to be asked of, how do we take an issue like Black Lives Matter? Who is Black Lives Matter? Or who is Antifa? What you see people that are defending them say is, well, they're not like a top-down leadership. It's not like your local Elks Club where you're taking minutes every day and things like that, right? And so it's hard to point and say, well, this is the elected officer of Black Lives Matter. This is the elected officer of Antifa. It's not that. What it is, though, is it's a loosely associated group of people that have the same sort of political motivations. Now, some of the people in these, what we would call mobs, can be decent people. For example, the people that are peacefully protesting. And they want to, for example, just focus on these issues of police brutality and maybe people in the Black community dying. I don't have a problem with any peaceful protest whatsoever. Even if I disagree with your protest, I totally support it under the First Amendment. But what we see, the people that are financially backing and that are pushing the narrative for this, that are really controlling the mob, this is a political movement designed to erase the history of the United States, to achieve political power, to usher in a sort of globalist, sort of Stalinist-esque fascism where we all become dependent on the government. And they call themselves things like anti-fascist. But you could look at what the anti-fascists are, and they're actually fascists. They're using the tactics of a fascist. The same with Black Lives Matter. Some of them might be totally reasonable and only focused on Black lives, but a lot of them are focused on things like setting up adversarial relationships with the police in general, or setting up adversarial relationships with people based on their skin color by saying people of a certain color are responsible for the sins of their fathers and that they owe something to people that look different and things like that. So the question we have to ask, and I kind of wanted to get into this a little, we'll see if it fits in with this question, is one of the things that I argued in debate back in 2004 that you heard often was this idea that you can't be racist if you don't have institutional power. Merriam-Webster just changed the definition of racism in their dictionary to say basically that racism is prejudice plus power. Now, this is clearly nonsense because you could have no political power, be a racist, and go out and physically beat someone. That's clearly an act of racism regardless of what your skin color is. You didn't need political power to have that racism have a real-world impact on someone. But if that's the game they're going to play, if that's what I would call the mob is going to play, then I would ask you, where are the institutions in this country right now? Are they on the side of white supremacy? Clearly not. Anyone who associates with any white supremacist group is drummed out of all polite society. And when I say institutions, I don't just mean law enforcement and Congress. I also mean institutions of our culture, such as Hollywood, such as the media, such as our universities, things like that. But all of those groups are currently putting right in their logo, Black Lives Matter. They're currently saying that white people have the idea of original sin. They're saying that this country is evil. So I would propose that you better be careful when you're saying that some prejudice and some racism is less harmful than others based on who has institutional power, because we're not a far way away from saying, well, if that's the case, then it seems difficult at this point in time to say that people that are against Black Lives Matter can be racist because they have zero institutional power right now.
So, according to those rules, if I'm reading this right, Hollywood is racist because The Bachelor just this year or just this week had their first Black Bachelor, and they've been on the air since 2002. Todd?
Yeah, Carlos. I mean, this If you want to call
those are the rules,
racist,
right? Are those the
yeah,
rules?
if you want to call something or somebody racist, I mean, it's there. I got to be honest with you, having been called, as I mentioned previously, having been called a racist in a court filing, and it was proved to be absolute nonsense, right? I mean, it's 2020. We live in the most connected society ever in the history of the world, right? If we're going to try to go back and rewrite what we can't change from hundreds of years ago and not deal with today and our interpersonal relationships and interpersonal communication with each other, we're in trouble. I mean, it's easy to go back and look at the history. It's easy to go back and look at that. But we are so far removed from that in 2020 in getting along. If all you want to do for those that want to divide and keep doing that, leave. Leave. We're tired of it. Right. Absolutely tired of it. We want to get along. Right? I have friends that I'm not going to get to see at the end of this month that are friends that I've had for more than 20 years. We normally get together at the end of June, beginning of July, and the hugs that we give each other are meaningful hugs. Time spent together is quality time. And when you don't see folks for the better part of a year, you want to get caught up. It takes all of 10 minutes, and you want to spend that time in the moment being with them. Oh, by the way, my dear friends, they happen to be Black friends of mine. Mm-hmm. Do I have to put the qualifier on that, or can they not just be my friends?
Right. And that's the problem is the nomenclature and the things that you say with respect to the identity politics, and all it does is divide. It doesn't, it doesn't bring anybody together. On that thread, your thoughts on the Minneapolis Police Department disbanding yesterday, Rob?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about doing this now, shotgun style, till our final comments.
Sure.
It's 12:37.
Sure. Yeah, this is a classic example of the original message that everyone could get behind, which was police brutality sucks. And even the message after that of Black Lives Matter. Look, we could get into the data. The data doesn't match up with the narrative that's being pushed out there. Yes, in reality, blacks are, I believe, about 2.5 times more likely to be killed by a police officer than whites, but it's only certain communities, right? That's not true in, for example, Williamsport. That's not true where I'm at in Clarion. It's because it has nothing to do with skin color. It has to do with the fact that these areas where there are majoritarily Black areas in these inner cities are war zones. And if you're a police officer and you're where I'm at in Clarion County and you're suiting up one night and you get off at 11, you say, hey, I hope I get back by 11 so I can catch the end of Monday Night Football. But if you're a police officer suiting up in inner city Chicago, you're saying, I hope I get back to see my family tonight. Because it's a far more lethal job. And so if you're involved in a situation where, it's like 60, I don't even know what the exact numbers, but in these communities, we see over 50% of homicides are occurring in these very small communities. You're going to have a situation where there is more violence with the police, both justified and unjustified on the police's part. And so what happens is we get this hijacked by a bunch of people that don't care. And I really mean this. This is I have more contempt for these people, particularly those with extreme privilege like those in Hollywood that are out there kind of bailing out rioters, and they're out there suggesting to disband the police because they don't care at all about the 7,000 plus African Americans that are killed in intra-racial homicide every year. In other words, Black on Black crime. They don't care. And now through their virtue signaling and pushing forth this kind of ridiculous narrative based on a lie about cops intentionally killing unarmed Black people for racist reasons, now you're going to disband the very institution that could best fight these actual homicides that the majority of young Black men are being killed with. And we've seen this in Ferguson. They called it the Ferguson effect in Baltimore. Right. After the protests, the police decided to pull out of inner city Baltimore. What happened? Homicides went through the roof. LA, for example, has said since these current riots have started, homicides have been up 250% in LA. So now it's just so a bunch of wealthy elite people could feel good about themselves, and a bunch of kids that live in their mom's basement that think communism is a good idea so they could feel good about themselves. Now Black people in the inner city are having their cities burnt down in riots, and they're having police removed that will directly lead to increased crime, increased homicide. I challenge you to go look at a video you can find right now of the rapper Tupac. And I believe he was being interviewed in 60 minutes.
Incredible video.
And what he says is, he finds it offensive that there's this idea that white people are like, well, we're afraid of crime. We're afraid of our home being broke into. He says, guess what? Black people have the exact same fear.
Exactly.
It's just we live in these communities. You think just because I live next to the homicidal burglar that I associate with him? No, we need that protection too. But instead, in our effort to sound woke, we're disbanding police, which is going to make lives in those communities far much worse. Notice that you don't hear all the politicians saying, oh, disband our security forces, disband our police. You don't hear them saying that because they know.
Well, I hope that the woke wake and realize that bad guys are bad guys regardless of the color. 1 minute to you on the disbanding of police, Todd.
I just want to know who the elected officials that voted to disband the police department in Minneapolis are going to call if, heaven forbid, anything were to happen to their personal property, vehicle, or someone breaks into their home or tries to set it on fire or whatever. Who do they plan to call?
Didn't you hear?
Counselor?
Didn't you hear what they said? This was asked on MSNBC, and the head counselor said that's white privilege. The fact that you just thought about that's white privilege. If you're worried about your home being broken into, that's you exhibiting your white privilege.
Exactly right. Exactly. Your facial expressions captured it all there, Todd. 2 minutes. 2 minutes, please, Rob, on the new breakaway republic of Chaz.
Well, first off, Trump shouldn't intervene. I think that we should let it go. I hope that it lasts a big, long time so everyone can see how insane these people are. For example, yesterday I saw a video from Chaz. For those of you who don't know, it's in Seattle. Antifa and Black Lives Matter have taken over 6 city blocks. They've proved everything that conservatives have been talking about. For example, the first thing they did was set up a wall. And then they have armed people that are enforcing their code. Kind of like police officers, right? And then what are those officers doing? Stopping and frisking people before they allow them into the community. And we can see how it's an unmitigated disaster because they criticize things like capitalism, but capitalism leads to specialization and actually knowledge of things. For example, our farmers are so effective at growing food. Why? Because a capitalist system has allowed them to specialize in that. Go ahead and go on YouTube and look up the Republic of Chaz or whatever they're calling themselves and their great farm, where they threw topsoil on the ground and then just tried to throw seeds in it like that was going to work. I saw a gentleman
given to them by Bloomberg, right?
Yeah, right.
Bloomberg gave
Yeah, and then I saw a gentleman yesterday, shoeless, waving a machete in people's face, threatening to kill them, and no one knew what to do. Well, we either have this warlord named Raz, who is a rapper / someone I believe who's on what's that called? Airbnb. He's a big Airbnb person. He's declared himself a warlord, and now he's the police there. So one option you have is to go to your local warlord.
He's the exalted leader.
Oh, that's an exalted leader. I'm sorry. Leader. So you could go to your exalted leader / warlord for protection, or you just leave the maniac run around with the machete. And make no mistake about it. This is what these people want for your community. This is what they want. The Democrats pretend to sound reasonable, but this is what they want. And to the extent where they either they want it or they're too cowardly to speak up about it. Again, the mayor, it's when Trump said, you can't do this. This is insurrection. The last time this happened, right, we had a civil war over it. Everyone realizes that, right? That's what happened the last time we had states or communities that said we're no longer part of the United States. So just to give everyone a clear idea, the mayor says this is just democracy. Keep in mind the police have said that there are rapes going unreported that they can't get into solve. Local businesses are being extorted by these warlords to give protection money. And all of this is occurring. Meanwhile, the governor, Inslee, when he was asked about it 2 days after it was formed, he said, I haven't heard about that.
I haven't heard about it.
Imagine the governor of Pennsylvania saying in his biggest city, Philadelphia, 6 city blocks get taken over and secede from the country. And he says, I'm sorry, I haven't heard of it. That's how ridiculous this is.
Governor Wolf would ask you to hold his beer.
He'd say, well, there's 2 Pennsylvanias. Yeah. So,
Yeah. Todd, your thoughts real quick on Chaz.
So my understanding is they're petitioning pro sports leagues to get their own professional teams in the autonomous zone so that then they can have games within the autonomous zone and sell merchandise so then they can begin to charge taxes, confiscatory taxes of the businesses that they've taken over and that are behind the wall that Robert talked about. We live in a country in 2020 that is so sideways right now, it's ridiculous.
It looks like Twitter.
Yeah. It's ridiculous. You're telling me that armed people in this nation commandeered 6 city blocks, and they haven't been stopped yet. Are we living in the Twilight Zone or what?
Right.
Todd, let me ask you a question. You know how we had in Harrisburg a bunch of people protesting the lockdown? How fast do you think that Governor Wolf would have stamped that down with the state police if they would have taken over 6 city blocks, set up walls, and said that the police weren't allowed in there?
They wouldn't have gotten to 1 block, let alone 2, let alone 6.
But remember, we're told the institutional power is all about racism. It's institutional racism we have. Yet somehow you're allowed to be as bigoted as you want if you're on that side. You could be as extreme as bigoted as you want. And you actually have cover from mainstream politicians.
And to Carlos's point, if the state leadership, local leadership, state leadership continues to let this happen, you're going to drop it in the federal jurisdiction to come in and clean up the mess. We've seen how that plays out.
Well, that's what they want.
Right. 12:46, by the way. So we got to make it quick on quick comments. I just want to make sure that everybody understands that there was a Seattle City Council person that was dressed in black with a black mask that was leading Antifa into City Hall to take over City Hall. And it was the mayor of Seattle that said that this is just a quote, reimagining, unquote, of what the future looks like.
Summer of
in
love.
that 6-blocker, right. And the governor is been in power since 2013. I can make a very strong case that these people colluded with Antifa and Black Lives Matter to do this. Maybe not to take over it, but they allowed it to happen.
Sure.
Given that the evidence is, in my mind, that the police chief said that she didn't do it and she wasn't part of it and she didn't have a say. That being said, let's quickly move on to Todd. Cancel culture at the New York Times. Apparently, there are some editors that are millennials that have revolted at the New York Times because the New York Times, obviously the OK boomers at the New York Times, allowed Senator Tom Cotton to write an op-ed regarding using military force to go into some of these cities that have been taken over by rioters. And some of the, I guess it was 5 or 6 of the editors that are millennials went to Twitter and said that they were in danger, that by allowing Tom Cotton to write this op-ed, who's a Republican senator from Arkansas, was put their lives in danger. Can you give me 1 minute on that at 12:48, and then Robert, please?
Yeah, free speech ain't free, folks. I got to tell you that right now. Being in the room in Harrisburg and watching some of the groupthink that's going on, I just got to tell you, if you're not down for the narrative, you're going to be an outcast. And we're seeing this play out, at the New York Times and other national publications that are read on a daily basis, that if you're not going to go along with this narrative, that we're going to tell you what you're going to believe and you better lap it up, right? Then you're going to be run out. And they want one side of the message and one side of the message only. When you're standing in front of the general counsel for the governor and you ask the governor directly, as I did, and say, well, to keep everything in order, are you going to seek immediate injunctive relief? And they go, wait, you're not supposed to know the plan. And the governor says, well, we're not going to, don't let the legal strategy out of the bag yet. No, it's very simple what you're going to go do. And we all know what you're going to go do. Well, most of us know what you're going to go do, right? And then he did it.
Robert, on the New York Times.
Yeah,
1 minute, please.
We hear all the time the press say the importance of the press, like the correspondence dinner and all that. They're right. A free press is important to the society. It's a shame we don't have one. We have good people like Todd. There's a handful of people out there. But basically, when you have the gold standard for press, supposedly, in this country, the New York Times, admit we are now just propagandists that will only push one side of the issue. Our country's in a lot of trouble. And that's why so many people that you thought that were reasonable in your life are now pushing this lie about how racist this country is and about cops shooting unarmed black men. And the other thing I'll say about this is, I talk about this all the time. The reason that people want to censor and control thought like this is because they know if the truth gets out there, their side can't win. So the less that you have the facts on your side, the more you have to demand that no other side be allowed to voice their concerns. So that lets you know that they know this is a lie. They know it's a lie. And that's why they have to censor everyone who points that out.
Lead us in, Todd. lead us in to, and it's 12:50. We got 10 minutes left. In 90 seconds, walk us through what happened in Williamsport last weekend with Black Lives Matter, and what's at the horizon with the National Socialist Movement, and the shell game that the mayor is playing with them regarding the protest permits.
So there was a protest held on Market Square last Sunday, very well attended, more than 200 people, and they occupied the four corners of Market Square. Well,
way more than 200 people. Way more
right,
than 200 people.
If you're going to do that, my understanding of the way the law is written, you need to have a permit. Well, the administration came out and said, oh, it's a breaking news event. We're not going to issue a permit because we don't have to.
It's First Amendment.
The issue is, the record's very clear. There were conversations going on between the protest organizers and the administration. They knew it was going to happen. Law enforcement was staged as a presence.
Which protesters? Define which protesters. Black Lives Matter.
Correct. Yeah, there were conversations going on with the administration, and the administration punted. They didn't want to issue a permit, because if they issued a permit for that protest, they'd have to turn around and issue a permit for NSM to have their rally in July, which they've already punted on multiple times, citing COVID and this and that.
So how did they get away with it?
How'd
they get away with it? How'd they get away with it?
COVID. They cited COVID, coronavirus, and punted because
no. How'd they get away with allowing them to? How'd they get away with allowing them to protest?
Because they did not, quote unquote, gather or rally. Well, when you occupy four corners of an intersection and you block pedestrian traffic from going crosswalk to crosswalk, and they did, the photos and videos don't lie, you needed to have a permit. So now they're getting too cute by half, okay? Right. And the unintended consequence of not issuing a permit to those protesters, NSM is bringing all their rowdy friends come July.
Right. National Socialist Movement.
Yeah, I got a real sneaking suspicion that they're going to end up occupying the four corners of Market Square
without a permit.
And
there's no one to be able to stop them based on the regulations and the guidelines that the mayor gave. Correct?
That is my understanding. Yes, and it's being planned for right now, and
right.
Rob, how is the intel that people are gathering? It's going to be. They're going to be here. That's my understanding. The weekend of July 18th, and it's going to be a mockery. Now, understand something, okay? If you're going to treat one group one way, you better be consistent.
Right, Robert. 1 minute.
And by
quick,
being
please.
inconsistent with NSM, the mayor has now set up an unintended consequence that not only did you have a BLM protest, you're going to have an NSM protest that you didn't want to have happen.
Rob?
Yeah, and just real quick, I have no love for white supremacists or NSM or anything like that. They're despicable. But one of the things...
all 15 of those guys.
Right. Well, there'll be more now that show up, because here's what happens. When you selectively apply laws, when you selectively apply our rights to the Bill of Rights, based on, it's cool if it's groups I like, but it's not good for groups I don't like. What you do is you then make their purpose seem legitimate. And so now they will have justifiable anger where they'll say, well, you said the law didn't apply to a group that you liked in Black Lives Matter. Now we're going to show up and we're going to do the same thing. And now it puts the town of Williamsport in a difficult position because, one, they either crack down on this movement like they didn't before, or two, they have to leave now a bunch of disgusting people that you otherwise wouldn't want to be. They're now allowed to be there without a permit blocking traffic like Black Lives Matter would. And let me just say, if you say, well, I don't care about NSM, let the police crack down on them. Understand that this same argument's being used across the country right now to say that people that want to protest to open their business are disgusting and we shouldn't grant them their First Amendment rights because they're endangering us. But if you're protesting racism, that somehow puts you in a different class. That selective application of the law will always backfire and will always make things worse.
Exactly. Todd, two American minutes for your closing statement.
What a week we've had. We've had the governor go on record on I believe it was Monday with the masks that are required and then are not required, and then Wednesday doubled down and said they are required again, and saying two Pennsylvanias. It's just an amazing week to see that we have co-equal branches of government going toe-to-toe with one another. saying that, one has lord over the other. In 2020, I just think it's just, we're living in unbelievable times right now. We really, really are. To be at the forefront with this program, to be in that room, to be in multiple rooms, in these high level of conversations is quite something. That's on the political side. On the home front, if you will, the Myrtle Beach story has now reached part 17 with part 18 on the horizon. There are some developments in the story that will be happening over the next several weeks that people need to stay tuned for. And for this story to have reached the Pennsylvania State Attorney General's desk with a referral from Lycoming County District Attorney Ryan Gardner, and for that case to be considered, really should give people a wake-up call. It really, really should.
Absolutely. Robert?
So,
quick.
There's so much going on. What I want to say is, I want to make it clear that I actually care about what's going on in inner cities. I care about things like police brutality as well. Most of the people controlling the narrative from the establishment, they don't care at all. They're doing it because it's chic, or they think it'll get them money, or they think that it'll make them in with the cultural elite, or they're using it to continue to divide us. Because if poor people and people that this government hasn't worked for, like the middle class and the working class and the poor in this country, realize that we could come together to take our country back from these elected officials that do nothing from us, then we could actually start to achieve real significant change for all Americans. But instead, because we're basing things on this lie and allowing this to be hijacked based on race and cause more division, we're becoming more separated than ever. And trust me, the establishment is laughing all the way to the bank. If you're in the black community and you think, yes, but I'm concerned about my race, I get it. And you have every right to say those things. I don't think the data matches up the narrative that's being pushed. But I just want to read you a comment real quick so that you can understand how people in positions of power are spinning this to cause racial division. L'Oreal fired a spokesperson 3 years ago for making racially insensitive comments. They've recently hired her back and apologized after the Floyd protest because they said that they're ashamed that they should have recognized she had some truth to her point. Here's her quote. Your existence, privilege, and success as a race is built on the backs, blood, and death of people of color. Your entire existence is drenched in racism. Racism isn't learned, it's inherited, and consciously and unconsciously passed down through privilege. Once white people begin to admit that their race is the most violent and oppressive force in the history of the world, only then can we achieve change. This is the people that are controlling this movement. I care about Black lives. I talk all the time about how the Republicans should be ashamed, one, that they're not speaking up and defending us in our country now, but second, that they're not talking about what's going on in these inner cities. I do care about that. But if you're out there and you're falling for this narrative and pushing racial division, this is what you're going to cause. You're going to cause demonizing people, and there are plenty of poor white people that never benefited from this privilege. In fact, most of us didn't. Most of us weren't born with extreme wealth in some way like that. So we really need to fight back against this narrative and come together as people and stop allowing the media, academia, and these other institutions to push us into this racial division.
Unifying.
Yep.
So, thank you guys. People losing their jobs because of what they tweet is proof that free speech is dead, and why our show is essential, and why it's important to have more literacy about the Constitution. It's going to take a long time to come together because we can't even agree on the truth, let alone have an honest conversation. When you tell me that my overtures and gestures are in bad faith, and that doing things because I'm trying to gain clout with the movement, you've lost me. I'm not one of those people that view your plight with compassion and understanding. I'm not. Partly because of your response on the street, but mostly because you've never had me in the first place. You see, as an immigrant Latino that also experienced strident racism wasn't wasted on me. By all means, continue to leverage Floyd's martyrdom to boost your social justice virtue signaling. Like Malcolm X said many times, you should be ignored. You bring no value to the cause. Here's the evidence. Why do you think protester demands are always impossible? Do you know why? Because they must always have a reason to exist and continue their martyrdom in an effort to exploit people for power. Where are your parents? Were you so coddled that you never learned that it's okay for people not to like you? You never learned that sometimes the best friend in the world you'll ever have is an adversary that will freely point out your weaknesses. And if you're smart and you're listening, you'll correct them, right? Be warned. Rob, Todd, and I will never give up our principles because it's no longer popular to have those principles. We hope people do the same. Call me a racist. But to you I say, calling me a racist is a meaningless prop. So I'll treat it that way. With mock and scorn, because you don't care about me, you don't care about our country, or our civil rights, or justice, or our heritage, or public safety. It doesn't matter to you. So I will never take a knee because I am James Madison. I am Patrick Henry. I am Samuel Adams. I'm Benjamin Franklin. I'm John Hancock. I am America. We'll see you next week.